Today, we're going to try and unpack a real paradox, one that sits right at the heart of America. It's the story of Puerto Rico. And it's an American story that a lot of us don't fully understand, mostly because it's defined by these legal gray areas and, well, some pretty profound human consequences. So, let's get right into it.
Okay, let's start with the central head-scratcher here. How can you have over 3 million U.S. citizens who can't vote for their own president? I mean, think about that for a second. This single question, it's really the key to understanding Puerto Rico's unique and, frankly, very contested status. To figure out how we even got here, we've got to rewind the clock. So this whole story, it doesn't actually begin with America. For centuries, it was Spain that controlled the island. But then a really dramatic shift right at the end of the 19th century completely changed Puerto Rico's destiny. Forever.
What's just wild here is how fast everything happened. So in 1897, after years and years of struggle, Spain actually granted Puerto Rico a degree of self-government. But that autonomy, it was incredibly short-lived. I mean, we're talking months later, the U.S. invades during the Spanish-American War, and by December of that same year, the Treaty of Paris makes it official. Just like that, sovereignty was handed over from Spain to the United States. A brief moment of freedom was just gone, replaced by the control of a new global power. Now, this transfer of power didn't make Puerto Rico a state. No. Instead, it created this totally unique legal category that has defined the island's relationship with the U.S. ever since. It basically set up a framework of being governed, but not really being represented.
The key term you have to know here is unincorporated territory. It's a concept that was cemented by a series of Supreme Court decisions called the Insular Cases. And what it established was that Puerto Rico belongs to the United States, but isn't fully part of it. And trust me, that distinction is everything. It creates this reality where the U.S. Constitution and all its protections, they just don't automatically apply to millions of American citizens.
So, what does that actually look like in practice? Well, here it is. Puerto Ricans have been U.S. citizens since 1917. They can serve in the U.S. military, and they have, with incredible distinction. And they're subject to federal laws just like anyone in, say, Ohio or California. But, and this is a big but, they cannot vote in presidential elections. They have no voting members in Congress. And their powers of self-governance are ultimately limited by what Washington, D.C. decides. It's a kind of citizenship that comes with some really huge asterisks attached.
So, given this whole legal and political setup, a really powerful and persistent question comes up. Is Puerto Rico a colony? Now, to answer that, we're not going to give you our opinion. Instead, we're going to look at how scholars and analysts frame the issue, based on, international definitions.
This analysis, which is drawn from sources like National Geographic and Foreign Affairs, it really cuts right to the heart of the academic argument. It suggests that when one government has the final say, the ultimate sovereignty over a territory and its people, and those people lack the full political power to decide their own destiny, well, that relationship fits the historical and political science definition of colonialism.
But look, this debate isn't just academic. This political status has real, tangible, everyday consequences for the millions of people who live there, especially when you look at their economic well-being.
43.5%. Just let that number sink in for a moment. According to U.S. Census data, that is the poverty rate in Puerto Rico.
And to put that number into perspective, just look at this comparison. Puerto Rico's poverty rate of 43.5% is nearly 4 times the U.S. national average of 11.5%. That economic gap, it's not just big, it's undeniable.
So what's driving this? Well, sources point to a few key factors that are directly linked to the island's political status. You've got the Jones Act, a federal law that basically drives up the cost of everything on the island by restricting shipping. We also saw major gaps and delays in federal disaster aid after Hurricane Maria. And all of these economic hardships have fueled a massive migration to the mainland, as people just leave to find better opportunities. All right, so after looking at the history, the law, and the hard economic data, what's the big takeaway from this really complex story? Let's just do a quick recap of the main points. So, first, Puerto Rico was handed over from Spain to the U.S. back in 1898. Second, it was put into this kind of legal limbo as an unincorporated territory, which gave people citizenship but held back full political rights. And third, researchers directly connect this status to the very real economic hardships and inequalities that people on the island face every day.
Which brings us to the final lingering question. After more than 120 years, what is the future of America's oldest colony? The status of Puerto Rico, whether it becomes a state, an independent nation, or maybe something else entirely, it remains one of the great unresolved questions in the American story. Thanks for joining this explainer.